What about the sex and relationship education?
Well, as you know, it is compulsory in secondary maintained schools, and I have said that I want there to be as much emphasis on the relationship bit. And just because something's compulsory doesn't mean it's taught well.
But it's not, the sex and relationship education is not actually part of a compulsory thing for every single school, and it's not also compulsory for all children either, because, I mean, this was something that was due to be brought in as part of the legislation before the end of the last government, which Michael Gove blocked. Now, I'm just really hoping that, you know, now with Michael Gove shunted out of the way, we can have a little bit more kind of sanity in this, because I just think having, you know, it's partly, look, you've got to have the updated guidance. You have had 5 years and not updated the guidance to even include the internet, and at a time when, you know, there is so much pressure, you know, the stuff that they have access to for young people now, and they don't get any proper guidance in terms of, you know, online abuse and pornography and all of those sorts of things. So it's partly updating the guidance, which I know you have said you will do, but we haven't for 5 years. But it's also, please, 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 make it compulsory for all our schools, make it something that every single one of our young people, boys and girls, should do, so that they learn the zero tolerance of violence in relationships at an early stage. Please sign up and do it, all three of us now.
As you know, just because something is compulsory, Yvette, it doesn't mean that it's going to be taught properly. And actually what I want to do, I want to see in our schools teachers feeling confident either to teach it themselves, so they're using the right terms and everything else, or alternatively they're bringing people in who, again, and that's where the PSHE Association, which we have given money to, is so important. That's why we've obviously backing the PSHE Association guidance on consent, which has been published last week. And I think what you were saying was you want to make it so compulsory that people can't withdraw their children from the lessons. And actually, I think that at the end of the day, it's heads and teachers and parents absolutely have a role in all this as well, to make sure they're comfortable with what their children are being taught. But it is being taught in most academies and other secondary schools. I have discussions, and often primary schools will be touching on this as well. But again, they will do it often in the right way because they know their children, they know what they can take. But I think that the best schools up and down the country absolutely are already teaching this. I want to make sure I help them and support them with really great teaching materials.
But there's a load that aren't, because they know it's not a requirement to do it, and it's not a sense of obligation on them to do it, and it's not got up-to-date guidance. And so, you know, we know there's so many schools across the country. If you just look at the work Everyday Sexism has done, it's been brilliant on this, just getting examples of some of the sex and relationship education that teenagers still have today. And yeah, it's all right, yeah, you're right, there are some fantastic examples, but there are also some dreadful ones. And because they don't actually feel that it is a requirement from the Department for Education. The Department for Education is not saying to them, this is really important, you've got to do it in every school, it's part of building the resilience of our teenagers.
That's exactly what I was saying.
Yeah, but it's not following through, because you're not making it compulsory, because every time we've put it forward in legislation, you've voted against it. And actually the Liberal Democrats have voted against it as well. The Tories and the Lib Dems voted against this. We should make it compulsory, because it's just not fair. We've got growing violence in relationships. It's not fair.
Make sure it's taught well.
I wholeheartedly agree it should be compulsory, and it isn't something we've managed to win the argument on in government, and I think you'll find lots of Liberal Democrats did vote for it, but those of us in government have to stick with the collective responsibility.
How would you deal with the teaching about internet porn in schools? Because that's quite hard for teachers to tackle, and it's something that all kids have access to now in their pockets, basically. I mean, how would you go about with that, Yvette?
It is, and look, the approach to it has to be age appropriate, and so it will vary, you know, how you address that for different ages. But I think some of this is, you know, when you see, I mean, you know, one of the cases which was in this sort of Everyday Sexism report was of a teacher who was talking about, you know, a 13-year-old girl who, as a result of having seen videos on some of the boys' phones, now thought that she was terrified of ever having sex, because she thought this was something that was going to be painful because the women were in tears and that this was something that was awful. And that was kind of her attitude now to thinking of what is it that's normal in a relationship. And so I think it's actually allowing, you know, teenagers to understand the idea of that a lot of the stuff that is now available and that they have access to on the internet is just not normal and it is exploitative, and it's about power and it's about abuse. And building their teenagers' relationship. I mean, there is obviously things you can do about having parental controls and all of those sorts of things, but being honest, as the parent of teenagers, you know, there's a lot of us who have to actually ask our teenagers to tell us how to use the parental controls. So a lot of this has got to, in the end, be about building their resilience and their ability to challenge things and to challenge each other and to challenge things they see on Facebook or Instagram and to challenge their friends as well. And that's how we do it. And that's why I just think schools are so important. You know, it's not just about parents, it's about schools.
And it's not just, I don't think it's actually teaching about internet porn, it's almost the antidote to internet porn.
Or
so
teaching how to handle it.
Yeah,
really.
and so they've got the facts and some kind of idea of what normal is, that is not this warped view that they might get from the, you know, the mobile phones being looked at in the playground. And, you know, in this sort of internet age where that is everywhere and frankly is of a degree that is, you know, far more you know, serious and hardcore than the kind of magazines that might have been sort of looked at in several decades ago. I think that there is a really genuine issue here, which is why the consent piece is so important for boys and girls, and also actually, if it can be well done, and I agree quality is key, to facilitate discussions amongst young people about some of the situations they might find themselves in and what the challenges might be and how they can make sure that they negotiate those with confidence and how they can have ownership of their own body and not do anything that they don't want to do and only you know, do what they personally feel comfortable with, and knowing that they have the right to do that. So I just think it's absolutely essential, and it does need to be in all schools and you know, for all children.
And Nicky, I was intrigued what you said about, you know, parents having a say. Now, obviously, parents have a say in their children's education, but, you know, recently there was a story on the John Oliver Show, which is an HBO show, about the idea of parents having a say in sex education in the States. And in the Deep South, where my mother's from, there's obviously a lot of issues about sex education in schools. And they interviewed parents who said that their kids should not be part of this. They did not want their children to have access to sex education in schools because their children shouldn't be thinking about sex at all. Isn't the problem that parents who would say no to sex education, those children are generally the ones who need it most because they're not getting any education at home either?
Well, I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I do think at the end of the day, I mean, schools are of course very important, but if we are going to get to the stage where we are going to start taking over as parents and forcing everything else, that's quite a big step to take. And I think that actually, again, as a Conservative, I trust the heads, I trust the teachers, I trust the governors. And actually that relationship between teachers and parents is tremendously important. And as a parent, well, I would never take my son out of a lesson. Frankly, I think that, you know, absolutely, I think he should be there with his classmates and listening to everything. But I also think that if I were a parent that had an issue, actually the relationship that is key is the teacher saying, you know what, actually I think your child would really benefit from these lessons. In fact, actually they're missing out from what their classmates are going through, and that important conversation that happens between parents and teachers, rather than government stepping in and saying, you know, I think we absolutely should step in. I did it last week in speech. This is very important. I absolutely agree. The consent, life is very challenging growing up these days. We have unimaginable pressures on our young people that we didn't have when we were growing up, and people were even a decade ago. But I do think actually that relationship, because if we take everything away from parents, then I think that's also taking away from being a parent itself.
But you know, the proposal that we had, I think before the last election, that people had done a lot of work on, and that was work between the government, between teachers, with faith groups, with parents, with all sorts of organisations, and had built up quite a consensus around it, was that I think, from memory, I think it was 14, 15 and 16-year-olds would not be withdrawn, that you'd still have parents would be able to withdraw younger children if they chose to, but at least you would say it should be compulsory for all children when they reach those sort of crucial teenage years. And I think, you know, you can build a consensus around that actually has the support for it. And I would just say, I think parents do have an incredibly important role to play, particularly teaching respect and respect for others and respect in relationships. But we also know most teenagers really do not want to know about sex and relationship education from their parents. And so we've also got to recognise that schools, for a lot of teenagers, they would rather be talking about it in schools with teachers than they would with their parents. And that's why you've got to have both. You've got to have that crucial role for schools as well.
I don't disagree that schools have a crucial role, but I also think absolutely, as you said, parents have a role. And actually, probably a lot of the conversations will happen way before 14, 15 and 16.